Test, test. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a bit of an audio challenge, which is that only I have a microphone. And given the fact that a panel would be super boring if you could only hear the moderator, we'll need a couple of minutes, but they're on their way. So please be patient and already think about the great questions you're going to be asking our panelists at the very end. Thank you. Test, test.
Zo.
Ja, het is. Heb je nou een aantekening? Oké, ik sta aan. Ik geef deze vast aan jou.
Zo. Hey, hey.
Je kan hem nog harder zetten, maar even kijken.
Ja?
Ja.
Ja?
Hij is al bij aan.
Oké,
Is het goed genoeg qua afbeelding?
volgens mij wel. Als jullie er even bij willen blijven, dan... Louise? Louise? Okay, we'll start with a warm round of applause for the technicians. Yeah! So, that's the opening then. Kind of a surprise opening. No, it's fine. Sit over there. Yeah, okay. Welcome everyone to this opening panel of your 3-day conference. This is the beginning. And we'll be discussing the role of academic research in shaping policy, as well as the constraints that the political process and democracy impose on achieving the best policy outcome. Thank you for joining. In our panel, we have experience both as academics as well as policymaker to give this panel a double perspective, right? So we can look at it from two sides. Our aim for today is to inspire academic economists to weigh in on politics and to help you with some tips and tricks on how to get it done and how to increase your impact. So that's the idea for today. And we have two great experts with us. So on the first, here we have Inge Bennaerts. She's the Director of Policy Coordination at the European Commission, and she has an extensive background in economic policy and regulation. She's been shaping key economic strategies within the EU, like the Digital Markets Act, for example, designed to ensure fair and competitive digital markets. So we owe her a big thank you for that. She has a degree in law, but she's probably read more academic research papers than many economists have, because she has been a keen user of academic research. This summer, because we're kind of like finishing off the summer season, right? She's actually made a dream trip to the Serengeti, but now she's back in the jungle of Brussels again, where the new European Commission is getting started, of course. Also, we have Luis Garicano. He's a prominent economist, but he's also a former member of European Parliament. So he's a super impressive academic background, now teaching at the London School of Economics, previously University of Chicago, and he focuses on digital economy, innovation, economic growth. He has helped shape the European Recovery and Resilience Fund, but he's also helped to design the CBAM, so the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. Of course, and making sure that our corporates can remain competitive, although we're doing carbon pricing here and not elsewhere. So that's also quite impressive. He personally told me that he did not catch any waves this summer, but he will be telling you about how catching waves is super important if you want to have a bit of influence. His time in the US has helped him to see the differences between the US and the European arena when it comes to policy making even better, so we'll be talking about that. So please join me in welcoming our esteemed panelists, Inge and Luis. My personal role in daily life is to head ING's research team, ING a bank. So we focus mostly on what's going on in the economy, sort of from a cyclical perspective, a markets perspective. But sometimes we have the opportunity to dive into more policy-related topics, such as climate proofing, the housing market, work that we did together with the economists of the other Dutch banks, to name one example. Also, I've worked for a political party, the Dutch Labour Party, and I'm a member of the Dutch Growth Fund, a policy initiative where a lot of subsidy is granted to enhance future economic growth. However, the initiative has started but has already been ended because of political decision-making. So a bit of experience in political developments also. I was curious, before we get them started, to get to know you all a bit better. And I have two questions for you. I'd like to know about your influence in policy so far, and I'm also curious to hear about your interest, your motivation to help shape policy. So let me begin with that first question. When it comes to having an impact on policy decision, political decision-making, policy development, I have three options for you. I've basically in all honesty, not have any or maybe a negligible influence. I've had some influence, and maybe people who would say, okay, I've actually had quite some influence on policy making. So the first one, and don't be modest here. Eh? So if you're proud of it, show your hand. But the first one is the one where you say, to be honest, hardly any influence or no influence. Who says that?
No, Antonio, you have to go in the second.
Okay, we have to make sure you're not too modest. Okay, some influence on policy making. Okay, quite some influence on policy making. Ooh, you're super modest. Okay. Second one, your interests. I'm also going to be doing 3 groups, right? Same thing. So, to be honest, not really interested. Or secondly, well, some interest, but it's not my main priority. Or highly motivated. Who would say, in all honesty, not really interested to have an impact personally? That's why you're here, right? Some interest, but of course it's the second thing. Yeah? Very driven to have a real policy impact. Good. Okay, so that's a lovely audience. It gives you also a bit of a feel for who you're talking to, who you're speaking with. But maybe let's first turn to you guys then. Let's start with something positive. Can I ask you, Inge, can you please start? What is an example where academic work has actually driven policy making in your areas of responsibility?
Yeah, well, you mentioned... Does this work?
You should probably turn it on or not.
And this one? Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So you mentioned in your introduction, Marieke, the Digital Markets Act, and that I think is indeed an important piece of legislation that is meant to regulate the economic power of the big tech firms and to make sure that the digital space remains open and competitive, and that large platform operators act fairly. And I think it's a piece of legislation that we put into place 2-3 years ago. It's starting to have its impact now. And I think it's fair to say that academic research, in particular academic research, has had a major impact in the first place in the agenda setting, in putting the issue and the topic of economic market power of big tech firms and the risks that would generate if it remained unchecked on the agenda. On the agenda in the EU, we as European Commission had commissioned ourselves an academic research paper, which has been very influential. But research definitely also in the United States, because these big tech firms having their base mainly in the US, I think it mattered a lot also to have that research done also on that side of the Atlantic. And the convergence of the economic research that put the issue on the agenda internationally, also in international fora like the OECD, has created the momentum, which is what you need in politics to make the transition from ideas to actually acts. I think the academic research has helped a lot in creating that political momentum. Secondly,
what exactly was put on the agenda? Could you make that very concrete for those of us who are maybe not that involved in the Digital Markets Act? What was put on the agenda?
The concern that if it remained unchecked in a fast evolving sector like the digital world, that it could create big positions that were very entrenched and that would be very difficult to undo them if we waited longer. And the harm that resulted from those entrenched positions because of the specific areas of economic power and being leveraged into additional domains. For example, from control over the operating system of your smartphone into payment systems, or from operating systems installed in your cars through to other applications that you would want to make use of.
Okay.
And that, I think, also brings me to my second point, that in addition to putting the issue on the agenda, what the economic research helped to do is to identify very precisely where the economic market power lies, and what exactly was the risk of leveraging that it would give rise to. And from a policy-making perspective, precisely because the digital sector is so innovative and dynamic, the last thing you want to do is to over-regulate and to kill that innovation. So having research to inform you in finding exactly the source of the market power and then helping you to design the mechanisms around it was really very useful. It was not completely alien to us because as a competition authority, we had, of course, for more than 20 years been doing cases against Microsoft from leveraging its power on operating systems, on desktops, against Apple, against Amazon, all of them we had been dealing with on a case-by-case basis. But that case enforcement work gave us a bit the sentiment of always chasing shadows. You know, once you're ready to do your decision, you might come too late, and moreover, you never look at the full sector. And so having the economic research, which brought some theory and systematization to the analysis, combined with our own empirical experiences, if you like, as enforcers, helped us very much to set the agenda, to create the momentum, and to shape the policy initiatives adequately.
And could you give, again, one example of a particularly hard choice when designing the policies where academic work mattered?
Yeah, again, in this Digital Markets Act, what you sometimes have when the momentum is created is that politics overreacts to it. And sometimes also when I talk to students or my friends and family, they say, oh, why doesn't Europe regulate this? It becomes a kind of a standard answer to say, like, let's regulate. And I think you very much have the risk then that you go too broad and you go too far. Yeah. And especially also because we are more and more also under time pressure, the risk is that you overdo it.
And could you give an example? In what field was that about to happen? Had there not been academic research?
Well, for example, you could just have said, which is what sometimes in other jurisdictions has been done more, to say, let's create very flexible rules. Let's just give more powers to the European Commission, that they can impose regulation on any operator, on any of their services, and they can design any obligation which they want to.
Yeah.
But that wouldn't have made that much difference compared to the normal competition law powers that we already had. So the research, again, combined with our experience, helped us to say, well, we want to go after the operating systems on your mobile phones. Yeah. And we want to make sure that new app developers, new smart watch developers, new what have you, can interoperate with the operating system on your phone. We want to make sure that you can install alternative app stores on your phone and not just a single one of the operating system. Yeah. Because like that, we can avoid that they charge 30% fee for any in-app purchase that you make when you are gaming on your smartphone. So again, it was our experience combined with the academic research that helped us being very precise and specific, and that helps us create those obligations immediately in the form of legislative obligations, which the tech companies have to comply with without years of litigation before this takes effect.
Okay, thank you, very clear. Can I turn to you, Louise? What is an example where you've seen that academic work has actually made a very positive contribution to policy making?
So I was thinking of that what you were chatting, and I think I would probably like to start with the Ukraine sanctions debate, with the Russian sanctions debate. So when the invasion took place, I think maybe 2 or 3 weeks after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, a group of German economists, I don't know if any of them are in the room, is any of them in the room? There were 7 or so, so maybe one, the probability of one is not too low. Bachmann, Rudi Bachmann, Ben Moll, Zularik, many German economists did a paper basically saying, you know, contrary to what many people in Germany say, if you actually shut down gas from Russia, the world wouldn't come to an end. We would not expect to be cold in the winter, and we would not expect big drops in GDP. I think they had 1.5%. It's basically a general equilibrium model, multiple sectors, Bachmann style, Bakhye style, very kind of general, with essentially putting the accent on the elasticity substitution. And basically, they got engaged in a large debate in Germany on how high, I mean, can you imagine in politics, there are Germans probably here, how high elasticity substitutions are. And the basic idea is that non-economists think that they don't exist. They think in engineering terms, everything is Leontief. You need, X tons of gas, end of the story. If you don't have them, you die. And economists tend to think like, okay, if you don't have gas, then you can do these other things. You can import the chemicals. You can do, things the chemical industry won't shut down because it will import raw materials instead of making them, whatever it is that all those substitutions take place. The initial debate, if you remember, was basically dominated by the forces of fear. Europe took very, very long to be serious about sanctions. I was in Parliament at the time. I remember preparing a presentation for the Renew Europe group, of which I was the Vice President for Economic Affairs, on Saturday. The invasion was on Thursday. I called all my colleagues. I sent them an email, and there were basically 100 MEPs on Zoom on Saturday, 2 days later, and I did just basic supply and demand. I didn't have all these elasticities, but I basically said, here's the imports, here are the exports, and here's why all this money is going to be funding I tried to make it as clear as possible. There was basically a debate that economics was on the completely losing end at the start. Germany was in a huge panic. We can't live without gas. And I can tell you that economics made all the difference, because the truth of the matter is, if Putin himself hadn't been the one who stopped the shipment of gas, it's not clear that the West, Germany in particular, would have stopped it. But the truth is that there was a debate that took place and that shifted public opinion. Chancellor Scholz, some of you may remember, had an interview on TV, really hard-hitting, where they really went after him and they said, look, economists say you can do this and you're not doing it. And he was very aggressive himself against economists, saying these guys don't know anything, all these models are senseless, they shouldn't be trusted in their models, and that's just BS, basically. The truth is the debate existed, and this is one of the points I'm going to try. Inge made a reference to it because we chatted about it before. One of the points I'm going to make over the course of the conversation. When there is a crisis, when there is something that is really, really set in stone, let's say gun control in the US, you can write any paper on gun control. You're not going to change the opinion of any congressman or congresswoman. It's just not going to happen. It's very set. When there is a crisis about something new on which people don't have a lot of opinion and they don't have a lot of views, you really have a window of opportunity and you can change. And the reference that was made to waves and momentum is this idea this image I want to put in your minds, which is that the policy entrepreneur, this is not the academic, but the policy entrepreneur is a surfer waiting with his or her surfboard in the beach for a good wave. You're not going to make change when the waves are not there. That's not going to happen, okay? You're not going to suddenly move everybody in 2019 to put sanctions on Putin. People are like, why are you talking about Putin? Over there, the whole Crimea thing happened years ago. What are you talking about? But you can be the person preparing models, preparing papers, preparing the work, and having the intellectual weaponry that allows you, when that wave comes, to be ready to surf, okay? So in that sense, I think academic research has 2 points of impact. One is creating, the Americans call it the permission structure, creating the kind of the dialogue that is going to allow for certain ideas to be there, okay? The second is helping this wave when the wave comes in, being ready. That's the day you put the op-ed. You don't put the op-ed 1 week earlier. Nobody cares 1 week earlier. And you don't get the op-ed 1 week later. Nobody cares 1 week later. The op-ed has to come that day. Politics, public opinion is exactly about timing. It is all about getting it in the right moment. And for that, you have to be prepared. And that's how you get your impact, in my view. There are 2 views that I think are wrong. One view is, and they're both in the same paragraph of the answer of Steve Levitt to his interview with John Harley. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but if you haven't, do see it. John Levitt on why he's quitting, Steve Levitt on why, not Jonathan Levitt from Stanford, Stephen Levitt from University of Chicago, why he's quitting academia. And he has two views. The first view is his view on the 1990s. He gets a paper out on crime, Janet Reno loves the paper, Bill Clinton loves the paper, everybody in Congress is talking about his paper. Oh, wow, research matters. I really get my paper. The other view, one paragraph later in the same interview, is the one he holds now. Research doesn't matter at all. He refers to the blinder metaphor, which I love, which is politicians use academic research like a drunk uses a lamppost, not for illumination, but for support. So you're not using the lamppost to really learn something, but you're using that research whenever it coincides with your opinion. What he says is, the reason Janet Reno had my paper is because it coincided with what she wanted to sell. In other words, she wouldn't have cared. I think both views are wrong. Okay? You're not going to change people's views on crime in a set situation where there's no crisis with your paper. But you cannot also say, oh, nothing matters, etc. A lot of times it matters. It matters with Jan's work and with what we were hearing about the Digital Service Act. It matters with this work by Ben Moll et al. On the Ukraine sanctions, and it matters in many other cases that we will discuss. I don't want to overstand my welcome.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Maybe one of the things that comes to mind then, Inge, is does this mean that it requires anyone who wants to have an impact to constantly be on top of the policy debate, to constantly know what is happening? If you have been publishing in a certain domain, to actually spend time on that, would you advise that?
Well, yes and no. I mean, certainly not to that extent, because I think academics are also one of the few in today's fast-moving circumstances who can afford the luxury to work longer term and to research also fundamental questions when they are not topical yet. I think in today's times, I can certainly feel it as an official, as a civil servant working for the Commission. I started more than 20 years ago. At that time, we were given like 5 years to prepare a legislative initiative. We would publish a white paper, a green paper, and have also a lot of that even academic expertise in-house. Today, we cannot afford that anymore because also, civil services have been cut in terms of resources. There's always more work and there's always more pressure in terms of timing. So I would say, please, academics, stay out of that short-termism and continue to be the ones in society who can afford to think and to work longer term. That being said, I very much agree with the metaphor of the wave. And I think if you are driven by having influence during your lifetime on policy making, then, of course, just like civil servants, as academics, you cannot afford to be in an ivory tower either. You have to know what is going on in society. You have to capture not just the waves, but also the underlying tremblings of the earth in terms of what may be coming. And you may at some points be the ones to point out that something may be coming when no one else has seen it yet. If you think about the COVID pandemic, I mean, there were academic researchers who had been warning about the risk with humans living closer to animals that such viruses spreading very quickly could emerge. So that's also, I think, a function of academics, which is not just react to what is already there, but see the things before anybody else sees them and warn society about them.
Yeah, okay.
I think there are both functions, right? And we are I think talking about two functions, and I think they're both useful. And Steve Levitt in a way exemplifies both. There is the fundamental research function, which I think is essential, right? You're not going to influence or to say something useful if you don't know what you're talking about. But there's that translation function, right? Which is trying to get your research to actually be understood. And we as a profession don't value that. Okay, so we'll later talk about CBAM. My team and me put together a paper on the carbon border adjustment mechanism when the whole debate was starting. and we just went over all the basic microeconomics of it. It's just basically supply and demand. There wasn't nothing very deep. But if you wanted to publish, I don't want to publish that paper. It was just a policy paper to influence, to kind of set out what the choices were when we were starting. But if I wanted to try to publish that paper, I wouldn't get a place, right? Where would you publish it? Who would care? And the problem is that we don't get the right incentives to do that second translation work. Sometimes you can do it through books. Sometimes you can make a blog where you tell your things, but who's going to value? I mean, not your tenure committee, etc. So I think that second, I mean, in a way, it's also a call for action to the people who are thinking of these things. That second part, maybe you could say economic policy, as a journal does that, I don't know. That second type of activity, translation, is a crucial activity because policymakers are busy. They're not going to read your econometrica paper, and they're not going to really bother about whether you identify it well or not. But they want to know the answer.
Yeah. Can I ask you to share with the public what you did exactly on CBAM, on the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, and how it's played a role in the policy debate?
So let me first give you a tiny bit of background, because it's really, really fascinating when you try to think of politics and policy. The emission trading scheme, I am assuming everybody here knows, but it's a cap and trade scheme. It's just about basically getting the efficient reduction in emissions. It's one of the most important priorities for our planet. It was born in economics, okay? And it was born in the US, and it was born in Republican think tank circles, okay? The Republicans loved it, academics proposed it. Why don't we just put a limit, bring the limit down, allow people to trade the permits, and they can get the efficient reduction of emissions. Everybody can think of the supply and demand, the graphs in the head. Now, in the US, not only this thing died, but this thing almost has killed the whole climate policy. Because 3 times it has tried to be put on the table. You can have Mike Greenstone tell you what happened during the Obama administration, and it just doesn't fly. It just wouldn't fly. At the end, the US has forgotten about this and have decided to go not also with taxing, which is the other possibility, but with subsidies, okay? No sticks, just carrots. In Europe, it succeeded for a strange reason, which probably you don't know, which is interesting. It's a politics reason. Taxes in the European Union require unanimity. If you wanted to have a carbon tax, good luck, okay? Taxes are not a competence of the Union. They're a competence basically of the member states, okay? Think of the United Nations. Everybody has to agree, okay? Prices are not. So Jacques Delors wanted to have a carbon tax, and he couldn't manage. He thought like, oh, this trading scheme is a great idea. So that is the reason, actually, not smart academic economists pushing it and smart policymakers wanting the right idea. It's just that that was the only idea that could be implemented. That's the reason we have an emission trading market of 500 million people, a gigantic thing that is contributing a lot to reducing emissions. Now, there's a problem with this emission trading market, which is our firms have to pay for polluting, other firms don't. So if you move your cement manufacturing to Morocco, you produce the same CO2 as you were producing before. You're damaging the climate the same as before. You don't offer European jobs. And you are basically damaging the same environment and reducing output in Europe and employment and all the manufacturing, whatever, all the things that you might care about. So the way we solved it is by giving free allowances. Basically, the allocations are given for free to the companies, and they can then trade them, okay, or at least part of the allocations. Now, the alternative is to say, oh, if you move your factory to Morocco, you're going to have to pay a carbon tax of some kind. So to talk in first person now, when we started the parliament, so right around now, okay, 5 years ago, I was very surprised. I had written in El País, I had written in kind of public opinion trying to move people in favor of this CBAM. But of course, I hadn't written anything in European newspapers, and you don't have a European public opinion, so you don't know how this debate is moving in other countries. It turns out the 2 Socialist Party people who were preparing the program for the new commission, Gualtieri, then later Minister of Finance in Italy, now Rome Mayor, the 2 Popular Party people, the 2 Renew, who was me, and the 2 Green people agreed, hey, CBAM is a thing whose time has come. And so we decided to put forward an initiative report. Ursula von der Leyen agreed to pay attention to the initiative report and to put it in the legislation at the end. Europe the Parliament doesn't have the right to write an initiative, but you write the initiative and you hope it matters for the Commission services. And who are going to write it? Anyway, you're going to, at the end, vote. So you, at the end, if they haven't paid any attention, you can say, hey, we said these things, you haven't paid any attention. So I did two things. I wrote a paper of the kind that I was telling you before, explaining what the aim, what the scope, what the coverage, what all these things, what the international dimension, etc. should be. The most important thing is, let's do like the law did. Let's not try to tax these imports, but have a system that is mirroring the ETS, okay? Just have the companies buy the same trading permits as they were buying if they would be European companies and be tradable. And then I wrote the initiative report, and then it went to the Commission, then it came back. How much does economics matter for all of this? It's a very economic structure. We had a big Green Deal in which we put together the CBAM, the expansion of the emission trading scheme, etc. But let me just give you one nuance on where economics doesn't actually get you all the way because of the politics, right? Which is, you want to expand the ETS to transport and buildings. Now, good luck with that. Transport and building, you immediately are thinking, if you're thinking politics, political economy people, you're thinking truck drivers, and you're thinking residents of apartment buildings. They're not going to be very happy, right? So what you do is, they created ETS2, a separate emission trading scheme with a different price, which doesn't get paid in the same way, but it gets paid not by the truck drivers, by the distribution. A lot of bells and whistles to try to pass it and to make it politically palatable. So you do push things, you participate in the debate. One thing, Marika and me were talking before the talk, is to what extent in Europe the Parliament is protected a lot from public opinion. Is that good or bad? I mean, to some extent, you're more protected than in the US, so you can do things which are politically more tricky. Timmermans was crucial, the commissioner from the Netherlands, in pushing all of this. On the other side, you might be doing things that, in fact, don't have political support. You might be moving too far ahead or regulating too much, which is also a risk we might want to.
Yeah. And only very briefly, the way I understood you is that you also wrote down basically, as you said, a translation, so a very sort of like the economic basics of CBAM with the different options and the different pros and cons, right? So you basically made it very easy to digest for anyone in political decision making.
And all the MEPs who were later debating and the team said, oh my goodness, how useful was that paper? It helped me all the time when there was a discussion on to understand what the pros and the cons were. So I felt like this is a paper that over my lifetime career will get 6 sites, probably. And that's why I say that you are not going to get rewards from that. And yet I felt like, okay, that initiative report was based on that paper, and that paper actually mattered to create the intellectual background.
You want to respond?
Yeah, can I draw from all that Louis says 3 advices for those of you in the audience who are interested to make sure that research has impact on policy making? I think the first is the point that you mentioned about understanding the framework in which policy is made and the other drivers which have an impact on policy making. And the example that you gave is a very telling one about the legal framework. Yes, maybe the research is that taxing is a better system, but if that cannot happen because it requires unanimity, then can you shift your research to think constructively on an alternative solution? So understanding the framework, and often, here is me, the lawyer, probably the only lawyer in this room talking, but it often takes an understanding of the legal framework in which your research has to be translated to make it into policy. So try to think also multidisciplinarily or put teams together or engage in a dialogue with people who understand from a different perspective, like what it takes to translate an idea into a policy measure. The second point is what you said, Louis, and it's very close to my heart as well, in particular when it comes to economics papers, I must say, is understandability. I am a lawyer by training, and as you said, Marika, I read a lot of economics papers, but I must say that when I turn the page and I see mathematical formula, I have automatic shutters in my head which come down. Now, that's not to say that you should cut this from your papers, of course, because mathematics are the language of your discipline. But what it is important then is that you try to accompany your paper indeed by something that is understandable to people who do not speak that language, in particular the language of mathematics, as well as you do. And the third point, which is a bit the intersection here, is to understand very well who are the others who try to influence policy making. And especially in today's world where that tends to be more polarized than ever, I think you need to make a strategic choice whether you want your research to benefit and support a particular stakeholder dimension on that theme, or whether you want to be part of those who try to oversee the entire complexity of the issue and bring the synthesis of these various disciplines. And again, both are valid options. But I think you need to be strategic about how do you bring it in the domain. I sometimes notice from academia that, and it's very nice because it shows how modest you are as an academic, that you say, well, I put my research out there and then if it's good, it will be picked up. That's often when I talk to the youngsters working with me in DG competition, how they also think. They say, well, if I'm good, then that will be seen and I will get promotion automatically. It doesn't work like that. And it's not a dirty word to be convinced of the value of what you have been doing can be having for others and to talk about it. It, of course, depends on how you do it. But if you do that in a smart manner and without the nuance that is relevant, then that can make a big difference. I discovered Jan and Jan's work on the profit paradox, which turned out to be very relevant for the policy work that I was doing at the time, by reading my daily newspaper, where you gave an interview, Jan, and where you talked in an understandable language about the research that you did. And so that, I think, is really important for the academic world, to not see the translation of very complicated academic work into something which is more digestible, common space, as something which is somehow dirty. Because I think it's really something which is very positive, and it's not because it might not be intellectually as challenging that it's not challenging from another perspective.
It brings me to a great example you shared, which did have a lot of impact in the paper, which was a paper you did with a group of 100 economists on labor market reform, right? Could you share your experience of it with this crowd?
It had a lot of impact. It's more of a negative example, but I'll tell you, it had a lot of public impact. So it's an example of how, I guess, not to do things. So I tell you our mistake. So I think that's why Antonio raised his hand in the first and not in the second of your questions. So Antonio Cabrales, me, and 98 other economists from Spain, we were among the promoters, a wide range of economists you could think, wrote a paper in 2008 asking for a labor market reform. Essentially, the market in Spain, it's a pity Tommaso is not here because of his COVID, because Tommaso did push a reform like that with Renzi in Italy, very much exactly on the same lines. So basically it's a dual labor market. Young people are kind of stumbling from one temporary job to another. They're never getting a fixed contract. Older people have these fixed contracts. You basically don't have a transition from one to the other. It was really a mess. And we can do the economic analysis, but I don't think it's the best employment of our time. All I say is that we published this. We said 100 economists want a single contract, which has an increasing firing cost and a very increasing termination cost and a smooth transition from one to the other, so that there's not a wall that makes people be fired whenever they're 6 months in the job. So we did this. We pushed it. We talked to a lot of people about it. And the unions came up very fast, very, very fast against us. Then there was a moment when Spain had to do these reforms. The Prime Minister Zapatero had to do these reforms. He actually invited 3 or 4 of us, of the people who had written this, to Moncloa and to explain him all of this work. And we told him how it was. And later, I heard from the person who was the Secretary of State of Economics in Spain, was an economist, a top economist, that we screwed up the timing. That, in fact, the Prime Minister would have actually been in favor of a solution like the one we were proposing, or could have been. I don't want to repeat secondhand. So let's say he could have been, but that by coming on our own too early, because the timing was not right for this reform then, we create a situation where people needed to position themselves. And most positions were like, for the status quo, we don't want changes. And so once people have positioned themselves, to change was difficult because they would have to swallow their words and say, well, actually, it's not such a bad idea. And so his view was that we came up like the proverbial elephant in the china shop and kind of, oh, this is how it should be. These economists, we know better. And in a way, if we had not come out like this, if we had gone to the unions, talked in private, gone to different people, explaining what we were trying to do, etc., maybe later come up with something bigger, we would have been smart, we would have been more successful. So it is something that had a lot of impact and that affected the debate. You can't imagine. Everybody in Spain, you can ask any Spanish person over, let's say, 30, they know what a single contract is. I actually was in a political party, a centrist political party afterwards that had this as a central plank, or a central plank. But the way we did it, this lack of a wave, if you want, hurt a lot. It would have been smarter to do the fundamental research, to continue doing explaining the labor market in Spain, having the clear graphs and the clear narrative, and not have the, hey, we economists know better, you know? I think that one mistake we make is to think social agents and politicians don't understand something when they don't want to do it. Do you think Kamala Harris and Donald Trump don't understand today that trade tariffs are going to raise prices, or Biden didn't before? I think they do. I think they understand perfectly fine. It's not like you can go as an economist and say, oh, you know, you don't understand, this is going to raise prices. I think they do understand it. When politicians propose something, it's because it's in their interest. It's a different thing. So I would say political economy models work great for politicians. The ones for whom it doesn't work as well as for voters. Voters have limited attention. They don't pay attention to stuff. They read a newspaper, they read your op-ed, they change their minds. So maybe doing that other work is sometimes, when it's not the time, doing the research, writing the op-ed, trying to push the debate.
Okay.
Just a small point on that. We talked before about the instances where you can influence policy making, and I mentioned already the agenda setting and the shaping. But I think there is a first momentum where economic research can have a major impact, and that's in the evaluation of the impact of policy measures which have been taken, whether it's the CBAM or the sanctions on Ukraine or the digital markets effect. And why I was picking up on this at this point in time is precisely also because of public opinion. It's tough, and I admire those of you, Luis, I'm looking at you, who have the courage to go into politics. I have advised politicians from nearby, and I have huge respect for the courage that it takes and the price that they pay. But if at least their also research could at least, if only ex post, you know, once they have already left politics, tell that basically the measures that they had the courage to propose or to implement had these positive effects. Or the other way around, you know, crappy politicians or policymakers show the negative effects of the measures that they introduced. I think that would be not only a very justified reward to the quality of the policymakers and the politicians, but it would also help shaping policy for the future and avoiding similar mistakes. So policy evaluation, I think that's an area which is not researched sufficiently, and I think it would be really valuable if that's also a point of attention.
Okay. One last question before we turn maybe quickly to the audience, if there's any burning question amongst the audience. We're beginning a bit about the US now, right? If you compare the US and Europe, where would you say the influence of academics is stronger? Is it better established to have sort of like, how would you say it, interference of the two fields? And what is better? Inge, could I first have your view?
Yeah, I see two issues there. I think we really need to pay attention to, first of all, continuing in Europe to train people into outstanding academics, but then also to retain them. And I do see that we have an issue in sometimes losing top academics to the US. I think also where the US is better is in the interplay between economic research or research in general and entrepreneurship. We have in Europe an issue with translating research into economic activity and in scaling, well, in having startups and scaling up startups. But where I do think we are doing much better than in the US is relying on academic research to translate into our policy making. Let me again give the example of the Digital Markets Act. I referred to it that we in the European Union looked at research coming out of Europe, but also coming out of the US, and both were very influential on our policy making. The same academic research was influential in that it led to almost the same legislative initiatives being pending for legislative discussions on Capitol Hill, with support across the aisle. And I was fortunate enough to accompany Margrethe Vestager when we visited senators and representatives from the two parties on Capitol Hill to try to promote the sponsors of those bills also in having legislation adopted. And it grossly failed, and simply because of the system on how political campaigning is being paid for in the US. And the huge impact that the tech firms have in financing political campaigns in the two parties.
Yeah.
So I think that's something to be very much aware of and very proud of, that we have in Europe managed to keep that type of influence out of our policy making, and we should pay attention to keep it that way.
Yeah, but there will be people in the business community saying, okay, and then look at what happened to Europe. We don't have any tech winners in Europe at all. And that's also because of the anti-competition and the regulation and so forth. So how do you look at the right and wrong of academics influencing policy? Because some people might say, yeah, okay, maybe there's influence in Europe, but the outcomes are very unattractive.
Yeah, and again, I think that's where academic research evaluating policies would be really helpful. I'm a preneur. I'm very eager to receive the objective economic analysis of the impact of the laws that we put in place, and if you see flaws, to adjust for it. But I think as such, you see enough basis in the research to, of course, also, I mean, that's another element that makes the analysis complex, is that there is hardly ever a single factor.
Yeah.
How comes that we have so much big tech in the US and not in the EU? Partly it may be related to the closeness of Stanford as a source of mathematics and other sciences. It's certainly also related to the functioning of the capital markets. The relevance of the presence or absence of regulation in this context, and the absence and presence of competition in this context is something that is worth research. But I don't think it's the driving factor of why we have big tech in the US and not yet in the EU.
Yeah. Louise, could you maybe help us a bit also in seeing the differences between the US and the EU, but also briefly on the right and wrong? Sort of like, are we implementing the right policies when we're using academic research?
So I think definitely the academic research has a positive impact. I mean, I also think in the US it does have a positive impact. Think of Obamacare. Obamacare, the healthcare plan, was basically designed by an academic economist from MIT, and it was based on all academic. I mean, the idea of mandating coverage without all the study on adverse selection and moral hazard would be unthinkable. Why would you mandate coverage? Just let people do what they do. No, wait, adverse selection. Oh, nobody who's not done research would understand that. Who has not done economics would understand that. So it does matter in the US, and the US does have a structure of think tanks that we don't have, right? They have the Brookings, they have the Peterson, have all this intermediate layer between academia and politics, where policy is the only objective. We have Bruegel, we have a few, but it's much, much less. But still, I agree with it that to a first order approximation, there is more isolation in Brussels of the political process, of the policy process from the politics pressure. For a bad reason, in a way, which is we don't have a European public opinion. As an MEP, if I want to talk about sanctions, and I want Europeans to hear, not Spanish to hear, but Europeans, where do I write? Write in Politico? Yeah, politicians from Europe will hear, but not citizens. I write in the FT. Well, I mean, forget it, right? Where did you write? So part of the reason Brussels is so influential is because, and so isolated, is because it is actually too isolated because there's not a public opinion. And that takes me to an extreme that Inge warned against, which is what has been called the Brussels effect, right? The Brussels effect, the idea, oh, we are the regulators to the world. We do the regulations in Brussels. The rest of you have to do what we say. That's scary, okay? Because the truth is, as the world becomes more important, we become smaller. They could just say, oh, well, do your own regulations. We'll do something else. And then we are in trouble. So I would say it's good that there is impact. It's good that the process is more isolated in some sense of political powers and contributions and all that. But the evidence today, and I was discussing that with Jan before, and to what extent this is scary or not. The evidence today seems to be, if I put together productivity growth, innovation, patent growth, unicorns, firms over 1 billion, tech firms, all of these things seem to point in the same direction, which is that Europe kind of innovation engine is getting a little bit rusty, and that we are very good at the same industries that we were good at 30 years ago, cars and chemicals, and maybe those industries won't drive the future. So I think, I don't think academic research is to blame for that, but I would say we all need to be cautious in pushing for all that kind of Europe as regulator to the world, I think.
Okay, okay. Sorry, Inge, I wanted to have a look around. Is there like any big question on your mind? And I mean a question, I don't mean a lecture. Is there any big question on anyone's mind of which you say, okay, this really has to be tackled? I would say we go over about 5 minutes as we started a bit late. Anyone, please raise your hand. Yeah? Okay. And, yep, I'll take the microphone with me.
Okay.
And I'll come to you. I'm warning you, no lecture, eh? Just a question.
One rapid question. Okay.
I think it's on.
So you've talked.
I'll just speak really loud. I'll repeat it.
Click on the on button. I tend
No?
No.
You do have an on button.
So I shout.
Yeah, shout, and I'll repeat.
So you've talked about climate policy and influencing people with research. How do you deal with the fact that more and more voters do not believe in climate change and global warming?
How do you deal with the fact that more and more people do not believe in climate change and global warming, is your question, right?
So I think that there are two things that tend to go together, which is, thank you, which is the economics and the scientific belief. It seems to be, and I was watching speeches in Parliament. One day I spent 6 hours trying to figure out if the opposite happens, and I didn't find an exception. It tends to be that the people who believe in climate change believe the economic cost, or argue that the economic cost is small, and people who are against climate change, you would think it's a 2-by-2 matrix. You could believe climate change is important, but it's going to be costly to do it, too bad, which is probably what most of the people in this room would think. It's going to be costly to fight to stop climate change. You could believe climate change is costly, but climate change is important, but there's no cost. We can just get all these green jobs. Or you could believe the no place in the matrix that climate change doesn't exist, and anyway, it's very costly. It seems to me that most people align. Okay, you could call it simple narratives, you could call it confused. No politician wants to go to give a speech. Look, guys, this is a nightmare. Okay, it's going to cost us a lot of money. You're going to have to invest in your heat pumps. They're going to be expensive. You're going to not be able to fly to Ibiza, but we need to do that for the planet. That position in the European Parliament, maybe there was one person holding it. The people who believe in one are going to tell you it's actually a free lunch. And the people who don't believe are going to tell you it's too costly. And so that narrative entanglement, what it means is that as the cost increases, or as people feel like their heating bill is going up, instead of thinking, oh, we are in this off-diagonal place in the matrix, they just prefer to believe, they prefer to believe we are in the low corner, this is bullshit, this whole climate change. In a way, you don't believe what is not in your interest. We know there's a lot of research on this type of phenomenon, on narratives and everything. I'm writing on this now. So to some extent, you can try by persuasion, by writing papers, explaining how things are. But the truth of the matter is that the voter doesn't have a lot of attention. It's rational, right? We say it's irrational for them to vote, but we pretend it's rational for voters to spend hours trying to figure out if these academics or those academics are right. So the voter is going to have a shortcut and is going to think, how costly is this, etc. And they're going to kind of focus on those simple squares, the yes, yes, or the no, no. And as long as this cost is high, we're going to be losing people. I mean, that's just what's inevitably going to happen. Our job as academics is to find ways to make that cost lower. And I think forcing people to get heat pumps is a very bad idea. I think doing quantity restrictions which get into people's houses is a bad idea. And I think price mechanisms, contrary to many politicians like ETS and CBAM, is a very good idea. Because the price of the gasoline goes up. Now gasoline costs 3 times as much as in the US. People don't strike over that. They just go to the pump and put it. You just get adapted and you don't have to feel you are a bad person because you travel to Ibiza. You just pay the overcharge that comes from the ETS.
Can I just add, I very much agree. I know, I think it's this one not working. Yeah. I very much agree with what Lewis has said. And of course, an important thing is to keep on making sure that policy-wise the right measures are being taken. But beyond that, it's like, again, what we lawyers say, justice must not only be done, it must also be seen to be done. And I think that's important here as well. It's not only important to do the right thing, it's also important for the longer term that the people are seeing the measure as being the right measure. And from that perspective, I think there's 2 things. One is keep on talking to those people who don't believe that climate change is happening and try to find different languages or different frequencies at which you speak to people. But make sure that you keep on seeking the engagement and do not retrench within comfortable circles of academics who have researched the topics and know that climate change is happening. The second point, I think, is related to that. It strikes me, for example, I used to work also as the head of cabinet of the Commissioner for Employment and Social Affairs, Marianne Thyssen, in the previous mandate. So I worked a lot on labor markets and labor market economics at that point in time. When I compare the 2 worlds, the world of the labor market economists with the world of the industrial economists or industrial organization economists that I'm mostly dealing with in competition law, I cannot help but to at least have a perception that the ideological background of academia in this field may not entirely be the same. And I think part of that is a risk also when it comes to research on climate change. I think academia really has to pay attention that any field of research needs to be ideologically balanced in terms of people working on those fields. Because otherwise you risk making yourself vulnerable that your research can too easily be put aside as coming from a certain ideological perspective. And so I think it's really important that within every academic domain you stimulate the debate with having people coming at it from different ideological perspectives.
You give me 30 seconds to the point about cognitive dissonance a bit better.
Yeah.
So just really quickly. So you go around telling people you cannot eat your favorite steak or your hamburger because of climate change. There are 2 possibilities. They stop eating the hamburger or the steak, or they say climate change is BS. That's my point, okay? It's very difficult for them to combine, I'm going to keep eating this and I feel terrible. So I think the research that pushes that view is doing us a bad disfavor, okay? The research that says, look, here's a system, which is the price mechanism, or the policy view. It says this is the price mechanism. It includes the private marginal cost and the social marginal cost in the price, because we're having an ETS. You can do whatever you want. You want to go to Ibiza? Go. 3 times, go. I'm not going to be telling you, you cannot fly. If you tell them you cannot fly and your next holidays you cannot do, you should feel terrible about your next holidays, most likely the cognitive dissonance will mean they will say, this climate change stuff is BS. That's my claim. I don't say there's research supporting that.
No, neither from my perception, by the way. This is just...
Okay. I don't know how you feel. I personally would have liked to listen to you for at least 1.5 hour more, but there are next sessions to get to. I think you've really helped us to feel inspired, driven, motivated, but also empowered, enabled with tips and tricks. So thank you very much. Big round of applause. We hope Tommaso Nancini gets better. Thank you.
Thank you.
You wanted us to keep it concrete. Do you think it went well? You happy?
Yeah.
Bedankt.
Very nice. I think personally, I really liked it, and I didn't want to interfere too much because I felt like you were telling very relevant stories.
Yeah, we tried to test that. Jan, did you think it was what you wanted?
Nice, huh?
Thank you. Yeah, it's true. I would, It's true. And we try to make it very concrete with examples all the time, not all about the fun.
Nice and slides and the really academic work will not have come, but this was a bit like an applied.
I just want to say hi.
Thank you very much for your questions.
For the
Yes.
presentation.
Yes.
We met last year.
Very good.
I just wanted to say hi.
Thank you. Yeah, very good.
doing?
Good.
How's it going? Is it to be back in
Oh,
Europe
it's-
and
it's,
outside of policy making?
It's cool. I mean, I'm enjoying it. It's calm. It's more relaxed.
Quick question on the pricing thing. You're saying we should let the pricing system deal with things, but how do you feel about?
Yeah, I think you have to redistribute. I
Yeah.
think you have to redistribute. I'm not against the opposite. I think it's necessary. But I think we need to move. Is that what you meant?
No, I was going to say about that.
No, I wasn't the one. Yeah.
But I didn't want to interrupt. No, because I wanted to ask a question, but then you guys, hi.
Influence thing.
Listen,
I
nice to
wanted
meet you.
to. I mean, you were one of the 100 economists of the
Yes.
you know, the labor thing. Oh, I followed it. And,
I think you were too small.
well, no, I followed it after that. I mean, looking at the labor reforms that took place
Right.
after.
In
after
2012.
That. Yeah, and then you think that the 2012 reform was in that direction?
Some of
or-
the things. I wrote it's a good reform, but not ours. Anyway, yeah.
Dan, when you asked the question, then you kind of touched on it at the end. You know, if you tell people used to their individual responsibility, then they're gonna opt out,
Yes.
which I completely agree with. But
If you
I
want
mean,
to make
as
them
a
feel guilty,